起きて歯磨いて金欲しいたくさん起きて歯磨いて金欲しいたくさん起きて歯磨いて金欲しいたくさんたくさん金欲しいたくさん起きて歯磨いて金欲しいたくさんそして靴履いて金欲しいたくさんあいついつも問題バイキン携帯留守番もしもし握る片手にたくさん毎日夢にお宝ジュエリーお寺が家い異なるイメージゼロならビギニそしたら利益リミットも消えるも決めたよキング宮地だユーロからドルへとビット言葉で世界回るミッション味方に約束したリスト地下から上がる人は一緒手取り措置完璧フィット枠消す形俺も一緒
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival live stream. My name is Tyler Wan, and I'm a programmer here at PAF. Today, I'll be moderating the Q&A for Purea and I Was a Simple Man. We'll be taking audience questions throughout, so please let us know and type those into the comment section below. Now, I'd like to start off our Q&A by welcoming all the way from New Zealand, the director of our pre-screener Purea, Kath Akuhata Brown.
Kia ora, Tyler.
Thank you.
Ngā mihi kia koe me ngā tangata whenua o tā wahi o tēnā whenua. Just the greetings from me to you all. Kia ora.
Well, I'd like to start out with your the beginning of your director statement, which is that Purea is a story that you've always wanted to share with the world. So I'd like to ask, where did this story come from, and what was your inspiration for the film?
You know, growing up under a system of colonization, I noticed that we had to, in order to prove our own philosophies and beliefs, we had to have white educators tell us what was wrong and what was right. But in my heart, I always knew and always felt that being Māori and the philosophies of my elders held some very beautiful, deep truths. And so I basically put myself on the pathway to telling this story as part of a bigger story.
That's amazing. And I know that you shot this film on location in New Zealand. With that, could you speak to the significance of where you filmed?
It's the community that I was raised in, a little community on the east coast of our North Island called Rotorua, in our tribal area called Ngāti Porou. As it turns out, a lot of the work I do actually takes place in this community. So it was great to be able to go home to do this. As Māori, we identify ourselves by our landmarks. So when I meet you and you meet me and you ask, who are you? I would say, ko hikurangi te maunga, ko waiapu te awa, ko Ngāti Porou te iwi. Hikurangi is the mountain, Waiapu is the river I grew up by, and my people are Ngāti Porou. So it was really great to be able to go home and shoot in the land of my mother and my father.
Yeah, especially the ascent of Mount Hawera G, if that's correct, is so powerful in the film.
It is a major landmark, significant to those of us who come from there, but also significant in the landscape of New Zealand, and that it is one of the more sacred mountains in the country. But, you know, I wanted to convey the thing that wherever we go in the world, our mountain is always pulling us home, and it features large in my worldview.
I think another big feature of this film is that this idea of healing through nature. Uh, I think it's a very big center point of the film. Could you speak to how that came to be?
Well, the thing is in our Western world, we separate ourselves from our landscape. But in the Māori world and in Indigenous nations, we know that we rely on our landscape for our well-being. We are not just humans walking around on this planet. What we are is we are made up of our spirit, of our soul, of our body, and all these things are gifted to us. And there needs to be a level of reciprocity with nature.
Mm-hmm.
So healing isn't just something that occurs in a vacuum. It is something that we rely on our landscape to provide us with.
Yeah. So this next question that I have is from another one of our programmers, and they wanted to ask. So the process of filming Hinatu Dell, who's Hama's actress, they said they seem to be heavy. How did you choose to direct her, and particularly in the more emotionally heavy parts?
Hinatu, though from there, had only returned to that community maybe 7 years prior. And what I did with her was, I mean, she's my auntie to begin with. So the relationship was really easy. And I was taught by her mother as a child.
Oh, wow.
And so we had a really deep connection at that level. And when we got to the river scene, she was wearing the greenstone around her neck. And I said to her, Hinatu, have you reintroduced this treasure, this taonga, to the water? Because those greenstones can only be found in water. And she hadn't done that. So she was basically bringing it from the bottom of the South Island to the coast and reintroducing this thing to the water. Now, what happens is that wasn't me saying, and then I want you to cry, and then I want you. That was a spontaneous response to the spirit appearing in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And actually the whole film was like that. There was no, this is the emotion you should be feeling. There was none of that. It was me gently reminding her of her connection to her land.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's so powerful to hear how much within this community was created through this film. So I guess my next question would be for audience members, instead of portraying a single message, what do you hope, what kind of feeling do you hope you achieve through this short film?
Yeah, I guess what moves me is to express to an audience how much I love being Māori and from this community. And if anything, I would hope that an audience got that. And I hope that they got the idea that doesn't matter where you go in the world, home is always where you'll find your strength.
That's beautiful. And I think your film did an excellent job of portraying that. Thank you so much, Kath. We're just about ready to transition to our next Q&A. So I'd like to close by asking where audience members can find your work and keep up with you.
I have a website, kathakuhata-brown.com. And I guess it's a matter of keeping an eye on the festival circuits. I've got a new film coming out. We just premiered at the New Zealand Film Festival, and then I'll see where it goes from there.
Right, yeah, and that's going on right now, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. And thank you for having me, Tyler.
Yeah, before we go, do you want to just mention the name of the film for audience members?
Yeah, it's called Wash Day. And again, we set it in, I went back home to film it, and it is an artistic response to a series of photographs that were taken in the 1960s, which portrayed us in a way that had no context. So all I did was tell a story that, with those images, that brought context to it.
Great. Well, thank you for your time, Kath, and hope you enjoy your afternoon in New Zealand.
Thank you, Tyler, and good luck with the festival.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Well, we're going to now transition to our Q&A for the film I Was a Simple Man. So right now we'll welcome into the live stream Chris, Makoto, Yogi, who is the writer and director of I Was a Simple Man.
Hi, Tyler. Thanks for having me. That was awesome, Kath.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. So I'd love to just jump right into it. But before that, actually want to point out that you're joining us from Hawaii.
I am. I'm in the
go
islands,
ahead,
and the Hawaii International Film Festival is here, going on right now. So my film is playing at this festival as well as Philly, and then it also opens theatrically in Hawaii in a couple of weeks. So I'm sticking around to talk to the locals while my film is released.
Congratulations. So my first question I would like to ask you, as the writer for this film, how you arrived at this story, because there's so many layers. So I wanted to know, did you have a starting point or a starting concept?
Yeah, it was a long time coming. The genesis of the film actually was over 10 years ago. It was during a time in my life where I experienced a lot of death in the family. I had just in quick succession, I lost my father to cancer, and then a grandfather to suicide, and then another grandfather to cancer. And I was just it was very disorienting, and I really didn't have the tools or the capacity to really understand what was going on. Very destabilizing, you know.
Yeah.
But the one thing that stuck with me is that sort of feeling of being in the room with someone who's kind of at the border and who's about to pass over. In the case of my grandfather, I remember him. He was talking to people who weren't there, and he was saying phrases in Japanese that I didn't really understand, and it really just felt like his entire life was sort of like closing in on us, like on the room around us. And it was a very terrifying experience, and yet in retrospect, a very beautiful thing to be present and to be witness to, and profound, and it just stuck with me. And so a little bit after that, I being a filmmaker, being an artist, it just like stuck with me, and I wanted to find a way to express it. So I made a short film in 2011 called Obake, which is the Japanese word for ghosts, and in Hawaii we call ghost stories obake stories. And it was really just an attempt to capture the feeling of being in the room with someone who's passing away. That capture that sort of haunting, beautiful feeling that I was feeling while I was in the room. After I made that film, I thought I was done with the story. I went on with my life, but it just stuck with me. I don't know why. It just I couldn't stop thinking about these characters. They're based on my family members, but pretty fictionalized in a lot of ways. Kind of just like taking textures and taking sort of details from their lives, but then sort of crafting a whole new story and a whole new life around them. So they just stuck with me, these characters. And in 2014, I thought, I can't get these people out of my head. I want to see if there's something there for a feature. And so I sat down and I decided to write the feature, and it just like came out of me. It was like one of those things that just like I was like holding it inside of me or something. It was like emotional vomit or something. It was like blah. And that became the first draft of the film, and then from there was a long journey to making the film. But that was sort of the long gestating genesis of the project.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely comes through that it's a deeply personal film, and like you said, I definitely can tell now where you got the aspects, the strong familial aspects and ghost parts. But one thing I also wanted to bring in was the incorporations to Hawaii's history, specifically how like how one of the Grace mentions how it's a time of great change. So I wanted to know how that came into the story.
Yeah, I mean, so much of my work up until this point has been uh, making films in and about Hawaii from a personal lens, from something that just felt honest to me and honest to my experience. Growing up in the islands, it's a place that's the backdrop to so many films and so many TV shows, and it's always in the media. But even growing up, I got the sense that it wasn't that wasn't honest to or it didn't feel real to my experience, and it definitely didn't feel. It to be honest, it engendered in me like a sort of almost like disillusionment or sort of detachment from my own home. Like when you see your home portrayed a certain way and then your experience of it is so widely different, it's like you start to then like sort of you almost start to internalize like the ideas of the outsiders or the ideas that other people have of your home, and it creates this sort of weird dissonance. And as like a young person, I just remember thinking like, this is so weird, and I don't know how to process all this stuff. And it wasn't until when I left the islands to study film in Los Angeles that I started to realize that every story I sat down to write was about Hawaii, and it was partially I was homesick, partially I was grieving. But I just came back to Hawaii over and over and over, and realized that when that I had something to say that was different than the sort of typical or sort of known portrayal of the islands in Hollywood or in different media or in tourist advertisements or in all of that stuff. And so I just my whole project for these past 10 years has been to sort of balance out that portrayal of the islands, coming at it from a place that's personal, coming at a place that honors the history and honors the people in a way that I think Hollywood definitely hasn't over these past 100 years. And I've been just very honored to be like a part of a community here that there's a lot of filmmakers who are doing the same thing. And it's very invigorating to be a part of that community.
Yeah, I think that that comes through a lot in the film, where the history isn't just brought out, but actually like interwoven into the characters' lives and integral.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but the island's a character for sure, and that we always with every decision we were making, we always had that in mind.
So I also wanted to go back to where you mentioned thinking about like creating this film. So transitioning from writing the film into actually shooting it. As you were writing it, did you, being like about your homeland, did you have like very, very specific ideas of, oh, I want to shoot this here, or I want this to be featured?
Yeah, definitely memories and textures. Like my grandfather's house, for example, which is a house that he built with his own hands, a house that I grew up in. Him and my grandmother raised me. I was at their house all the time, and just memories, textures, feelings, that sort of sense of wonder, that sense of exploration, sense of magic. These are all sort of like abstract sort of things, but those are sort of my guiding light when we were putting together the film. And when we I still remember when we Masao's home, the lead character's home. It's this amazing location on the north shore of the island, and it's so hard to find spaces that still have that sort of feeling of what I felt like being at my grandfather's home when I was a child. So much of it has changed, and so much of it has has developed in a different direction. And so when we found this home and then we dressed it and we sort of brought in all of the sort of details, I like when I walked in the door, I got like chicken skin. I was like, I was so moved and like transported immediately. And that sort of feeling, you know, like that sort of like excitement, that sort of like goosebumps is what sort of like I'm looking for, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So to continue off of that, I mean, there's some really gorgeous shots, of course, but you also make a point of showcasing that big transition and how much so much has changed in Hawaii. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, transitions abound all the time. And I think for me, as someone who's constantly in transit back and forth, it becomes so, it's so self-evident every time I land. You're just always kind of tracking what's changing. And one thing that really was like in my head when we were shooting was something that one of my friends said to me, and she's actually the lead in my previous film. My previous film is called August at Akiko's, and that lead Akiko, I was talking to her, and she's someone who lived on Oahu her whole life, but no longer lives on Oahu. She lives on Hawaii Island, in this sort of beautiful country jungle area, and she said like I don't go back to Honolulu anymore because it's just all concrete. Like I can't stand it. And then when I got to Honolulu, I just had her voice in my head, and that's all I saw too. I was like, geez, Akiko's right. Like that's all I see is concrete now. And it was sad. Like because it's one thing that I was aware of, but until she said that, I don't think I was aware of just how overwhelming that feeling can be, emotionally, and just draining it can be, physically. And so tracking that sort of change over the course of the film, the opportunity to do that was something that we really wanted to do, especially because when we were looking at photos from 80 years ago when Masao would have been a kid, it just looked so different. And we wanted to make sure that, and the island was so much more prominent, obviously the natural world. And so using that as a way to track time became, sort of like subplot to the film.
Yeah. So did you actually have difficulty finding those locations that could stand in for the past?
Yeah, I mean, we were like it's funny because it's a film that spans a handful of, or maybe 3 different time periods, and yet the way I wrote it, because an independent film, we didn't have a ton of money. Like I wrote it very, very contained. So actually, you're only really in like a handful of locations in each time period, and it's really just like keeping it contained. And one way I handled that was for the really past. We just didn't have structures. We just looked for places where there was no structures, and we could just use the sort of eternal presence of the island as a marker, and of course costume or whatever, as a marker of the time. That was just because building structures that look like the 30s would have just been so expensive. So that was just my plan of attack. Using that's sort of. Oh, did I go off?
I think you're still here.
Okay, using that eternal presence and that sort of eternal beauty of the natural world as our backdrop, or as our set for those older periods.
Yeah, and spanning those 3 distinctive times, so you of course needed different characters. So I wanted to know where that sort of process came in, where you developed those characters and then how you went about casting them.
Yeah, the lead character was cast first. He the first person to be attached to the film actually was Constance Wu. She was someone that I had worked with at. I was very, very fortunate to do this fellowship called the Sundance Directors Lab, where you kind of go to a space and you get to shoot your scenes and workshop and try stuff and screw around she was one of the actors that I got to work with in that workshop space, and that we struck up a creative relationship and friendship, and I was able to then I mean, after that point I was like, I feel like you're this character, Constance, like will you come onto the film, the real film, you know, not just the workshop. And she agreed, and so she was in place as Grace, a character based on my grandma Grace. And then for the Masao character, he was someone that we found just street casting in the islands. We were at a Japanese bone dance, which is like a Japanese festival, a summer festival. It's really big in Hawaii, and we were just like looking for people, and we saw this one guy like just like charismatically dancing. It's like you dance in like a circle and you dress up and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And he was just so charismatic, and he like just caught our eye. And so we walked up to him and we were like, hey, like we're filmmakers. Like, have you ever thought about or had any interest in acting in movies? And he told us like, it's been my lifelong dream to act in a movie. You know,
Wow.
He's in his 70s. And so we were like, great, like come audition. We love to like record you or try some stuff. And so he came. Obviously he was very green, he'd never done it before, but we just loved his spirit so much. We loved his face, we loved his presence, that we just brought him back again and again and again, and slowly started to do kind of like directing school or like acting school with him, like just kind of do exercises. And after a while we're like, this is the guy. So we cast him, and then it was about finding people to kind of if like once Grace and Masao were in place as the sort of main couple, then it's like just finding people that kind of complement them or kind of resonate with them or echo them in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. That was his essentially first role, right? And
it was. I mean, we cast him, because like I said, I wrote the script initially in 2014. So we actually we found him at that bone dance like in 2016, I want to say. And then we were having such a hard time finding funding, kind of hitting our head against the wall. It's like, it was just so tricky. And then I decided to make another film, which ended up becoming my first feature, August at Akiko's. So then I just cast him in that. I was like, okay, you come to be in August at Akiko's for like a few scenes. And like, so then he could like get a little bit of experience, acting or being in front of a camera, working with us. And then he did great. And it was kind of like a practice for the next film, which we knew was coming, where he would be like the main role. And so, yeah, so it was like his first major role, but he had done like this small stuff in our other film.
Yeah, with you. Thank goodness he had connected to such a busy director.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the sort of struggles we had with funding the film and stuff like that. I'll say, of course, like the film comes out beautifully, and one of the things I love is how the mystical or supernatural parts of the film are portrayed without like any seemingly use of CGI or anything like that. I just love to hear more about that in your process.
Yeah, I it's a great question. So much of the magic, I feel, comes from something that's not so literal, right? But like much more emotional or subconscious feeling. And because the Masao, the lead's journey, is one that's so internal, we wanted to make sure that we use that the way that we touch on the sort of surrealist aspects was really almost like subconscious feeling. And so a lot of it is actually then through sound. Like we do a lot with sound to communicate a lot of those elements, and a lot of just using the sort of details and beauty of the natural world, and hopefully in that way touching on something deeper. That was our approach, at least. It's so interesting, sometimes like I'm someone who really likes to use sound in filmmaking. I think it can be so useful. It just in like you can plot. You can do whole entire plot points with sound that would take, I don't know, a whole scene to do. And sometimes, the image, like sometimes I feel like the image can be too concrete or something. Like sometimes the image can be too literal or too real or something. Like there's like a concreteness to image that is a little oppressive sometimes. And there's something more flexible and more fluid and more mysterious about sound, that I like to lean on that, as much as possible if I can. And I'm very, very lucky that I work with like a sound designer who's an artist in his own right, and he brings so many ideas, and he comes onto the film from like the script stage, so he's already thinking about the movie, thinking about how he's going to build the soundscape, how he's going to build the interior life of each character. And then on top of that, of course, music is the other one, right? Like our composer, same thing, Alex. He comes on early. He reads script early, starts giving me ideas early, and so we're already talking sound in the pre-production stage, and then that informs also the images, right? They're also talking to our DP, Robin, and she's like, there's like this whole conversation going back and forth. And it's a very organic way of working, that I think that I love. That's just been really good for us.
Yeah. Actually, that's great, because I actually wanted to mention one of the sounds that really stuck out in the beginning of the movie, which is when you have this shot of the high rises, and all you hear is like construction and city sound in the background. And something that, I think going back to what you're saying, like you would expect that in like a mainstream movie portrayal of Hawaii. And sort of even if they shot the high rises, I don't think it's a very stark contrast and stark pointing out of the story, pointing out with sound that things are changing, and this is the kind of development that we're seeing now.
Yeah, no, I love that you pointed out, because it is a really good example of the way in which like the sound changes the image in a way that's kind of indescribable, and kind of just like it's almost it would be too hard to do that with just image, right? Like to communicate what that communicates. So we use sound, and it's purposefully overwhelming as well. Like when you're in the theater, that particular first scene is loud, and we make it loud so that it's almost like this. It's almost like a guardian at the gate that you have to pass through, because the rest of the film is so quiet. So playing with sort of like going loud and then coming quiet. And then, of course, like at the end, it also becomes loud again. And that sort of like loud, quiet, loud dichotomy we play with a lot over the course of the movie. And I like it. It's like music,
Yeah. And now that you're pointing out, like the very, very ending shot of the film is just the image itself is very, very quiet. Is that now that you're speaking about it, is that like that sort of up and down, was that something you had in mind from the start that you wanted to portray?
Yeah, I think that ending the film, ideally hopefully the audience has come along on this journey with us and experienced things within themselves. What our goal and was that always that we leave space in the film so that the audience can sort of meet the film halfway. They can bring a little bit of themselves to the film, and sort of like it'd be a little bit of a dialogue. So there's a lot of space in the film. There's a lot of silence. There's a lot of time to contemplate, and hopefully they've gone on their own sort of internal journey, maybe contemplating people within their lives that have gone through maybe experiences that they've had that are similar to those in the film, or maybe not had. But at the end, we definitely want to leave the audience with a sense of peace. Like we don't want them walking out of the theater totally disoriented and feeling lost. I mean, that has its place, of course. But in this particular film, we definitely want the ending feeling to be one of grounding and one of peace.
Yeah. Ed, you mentioned wanting to take the audience on a journey, but I'm curious, as a project that was such a passion project for you, what was your journey on this film like, and were you able to find healing and joy through it, the creation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, I in progress, I guess you could say it's always in progress, you know. But it's interesting because that first draft that I wrote, that I told you was like sort of like just the emotional, just like catharsis, had a very dark ending. Like it wasn't an ending that necessarily was one that, and I think is one that was much darker and maybe more cynical, maybe more about sort of full, like the voids and the emptiness. And I think over the course of the last 5 years, you know, as I've grown as a person and as I've sort of processed my own life and come to terms with a lot of things, the ending of the film changed as well, right? Because it's just where I was in my life. And so the film as it is now sort of represents where I am when I was making it, or where I was when I was making it. And it's interesting because it would have been a very different film if we had gotten our way and been able to make that film immediately. Let's just say we just got funded immediately and we were able to make that film. It would have been a very different film. And I feel one probably that wouldn't have been as good, to be honest. So it kind of needed that journey, I think, or at least I needed that journey in order to come to a place where we can make the film as it is now, and one that I'm very proud of, and I think a lot of people on our team are really proud of.
Yeah, definitely. And that being proud of it, it's so funny because I was actually going to ask what part of the film you're most proud of, you know, what aspect or piece.
I guess I'm proud that we did it. That's the main thing. It was so hard. It took so long. There's a lot of rejection in terms of getting it made. It was a really tough sell at first, you know. Even though we had a known actor like Constance Wu, and we thought the film, and we had Sundance like backing it, it was still like, you know, it was the same, sort of the same old things, like that there wasn't an audience for an Pacific Islander Asian American film. We heard that a lot, and so it's tough to hear that because we knew that what we would make would be beautiful and worthwhile and valuable. And so I'm just proud that we made it. And on a personal level, it was a film that scared me. Like it was a film that I was unsure if I would be able to pull it off tonally. It's so complicated and walking such a fine line between so many different genres and ideas and emotions. And I hope I pulled it off. I don't know. I tried my best, but I'm glad that I didn't run away. You know, that I got through it, because I was scared. You know, in a lot of places. So I guess that would be what I'm most proud of.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly happy that you are able to make this film. And
thank you.
You know, the last thing I wanted to touch on is, you know, they said there wouldn't be an audience for it, but I just want to ask you who you would want this audience for, who you made this film for.
Oh, definitely people of Hawaii. And so I'm in Hawaii now, and this screening that we're gonna do at this film fest at the Hawaii International Film Festival was a big one for us. We premiered at Sundance earlier this year, and then played a bunch of festivals, but it was always in anticipation of bringing the film home. The crew was, you know, majority local. The cast is majority local, so it's gonna be a nice sort of feeling of, I hope, feeling of pride in watching the film together. You know, being able to experience it all together in the same place. So we'll see. I'm nervous, but I hope people here like it.
That's amazing. And do you want to mention where else your film will be playing in premiere?
Oh yeah, so it'll be opening theatrically on November 19th. Right now it looks like we're going to be in New York at the Metrograph. We'll be in San Francisco, and then Hawaii will be playing at the theaters here in Hawaii. And LA, it opens on December 3rd. So look out for those listings, and you can follow us on social media. We're just at I Was a Simple Man on Instagram. and
Uh-huh.
Twitter, and we'll list all of our screenings and all of that stuff there. So check it out.
That's great. Yeah, and can people find you personally? Follow you personally?
Yeah, my Instagram is Makoto Yogi, and I'll also be pushing out any information on how people can watch the film as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Chris, and thank you
Thank you.
for all the audience members for tuning in. You can screen all of the films online this year. We're doing a hybrid festival, so we'll have over 100 films that you can watch over the course of November 4th to 14th. Find more information at path.org. And with that, I'd just like to say good night, good afternoon, good morning to wherever you are in the world. Thanks.